The emergency lights had stopped flashing nearly 2 days ago. There simply was not enough power left aboard the Sovereign Spear to waste electricity on warnings everyone already understood. Darkness ruled most of the vessel now. Only scattered strips of pale blue maintenance lights remained alive, stretching through endless steel corridors where exhausted footsteps echoed against cold walls. Air recyclers groaned with the rhythm of dying lungs, pushing thinner oxygen through a ship built for nearly 4,000 souls. Captain Kalen stood alone on the observation deck. His reflection stared back at him through the cracked, transparent alloy separating him from space. The proud silver markings across his face, subbles of victories earned across 30 campaigns, had dulled beneath weeks of exhaustion. His military uniform hung loosely from shoulders that had once carried absolute confidence. Outside floated silence, not the peaceful silence spoken about by philosophers, the cruel kind. The silence that watched entire civilizations disappear without caring. Behind him, the automatic door opened halfway before failing. Chief Engineer Soreth squeezed through the narrow gap, breathing heavily. "We've lost another reactor." Kalen didn't turn. "I assumed we had. There will be no fourth restart." Silence returned. Finally, the captain spoke. "Life support?" Soreth swallowed. 23 hours. He hesitated before continuing, perhaps less. Kalen closed his eyes, not because he feared death, because 3,812 people trusted him to prevent it. Among them were nearly 500 children. Scientists, doctors, teachers, families returning from diplomatic missions. Not soldiers, never soldiers. The Sovereign Spear had once represented hope between civilizations. Now it drifted forgotten inside an unclaimed sector where politics mattered more than lives. The bridge was almost unrecognizable. Entire stations had been shut down to conserve power. Officers worked beneath emergency lamps while blankets covered inactive consoles to preserve precious heat. The recycled air carried the smell of machinery, medicine, and people who had gone too many days without proper sleep. Communications Officer Lyra removed her headset. No response. Kalen already knew. "Still, try again," she nodded. "Our distress beacon has now reached 117 member governments." She looked toward him carefully. None have answered. Officer Herrick laughed. It wasn't humor. It sounded like something breaking inside a living creature. "They heard us." Everyone remained silent. They all heard us. No one argued. The beacon had enough power to cross half the galaxy. Ignoring it required intention. Hours later, Kalen walked through the medical decks. Hundreds of patients rested on temporary beds placed along corridors because proper rooms were full. Medical machines operated one at a time, unplugged and wheeled from patient to patient like precious relics. Dr. Saris hadn't slept for nearly 60 hours. Dark circles surrounded her eyes. Her gloves were stained with drying blood. She adjusted the oxygen mask on a young child before speaking quietly. "We've exhausted our nutritional reserves." Kalen looked toward the child. "Name? Taran. Age? 7. The captain knelt beside the small bed. Taran opened tired eyes. "Captain, I'm here. My father said you'll take us home." Kalen smiled. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done. "We're still trying." The child nodded weakly. "I know." His tiny hand reached upward. "You look tired, too." Kalen gently held it. "I'll sleep later." The child smiled. "So will I." Those words followed Kalen long after he left the ward, not because they were dramatic, because they were honest. Throughout the galaxy, powerful governments observed the drifting vessel. Inside polished chambers filled with warm lights and expensive uniforms, admirals debated fuel costs. Politicians debated borders. Corporate directors debated insurance liabilities. One council voted that rescue operations would establish an undesirable strategic precedent. Another concluded that entering the disputed sector could increase diplomatic instability. Not one of them mentioned the children. Not once. One admiral finally spoke. "They chose the wrong route," another answered. Then they accepted the risk. The meeting adjourned 12 minutes later. Millions continued their comfortable lives. The Sovereign Spear continued dying, far beyond every recognized border, beyond trade routes, beyond political influence. An aging human listening station circled a frozen moon. Official designation: Listening Post Kestrel 7. Most maps ignored its existence. Its hull bore scars from decades of micrometeor impacts. Radar dishes had been repaired so many times that almost no original components remained. Coffee mugs sat beside consoles older than some of the operators working them. Sergeant Daniel Hayes rubbed his tired eyes while reviewing another night of meaningless background signals. His shift had lasted 14 hours. Nothing ever happened here, until one impossible transmission pierced the static. "Any vessel, please respond." Hayes frowned. He increased the gain. "Life support critical, civilian casualties increasing." His chair rolled backward. "Lieutenant." The room immediately changed. Operators abandoned conversations. Headsets snapped into place. Signal specialists isolated frequencies while analysts triangulated origin points. Lieutenant Maya Brooks stared at the decoded message appearing line after line. Her expression hardened. Replay. The room filled with exhausted voices speaking an unfamiliar language. Computer translation activated. To anyone receiving, children aboard, please, don't let them die alone. No one spoke afterward, Hayes whispered first. They've been broadcasting for 16 days. Brooks looked toward the timestamp. They've been ignored for 16 days. She reached for the secure communications panel. Wake Fleet Command. Within 40 minutes, every major government on Earth had received the transmission. The emergency summit wasn't held inside a glamorous hall. It took place beneath reinforced mountains inside humanity's Strategic Response Command. The room was simple. Concrete walls, steel tables, military officers, scientists, civilian leaders, no luxury. Only responsibility. The recording played once, then again. No one interrupted. When it ended, silence lingered across the chamber. General Marcus Hale folded his hands. Gray streaks covered his hair. Countless scars crossed weathered knuckles. He had commanded fleets during conflicts every history student memorized, yet his voice remained calm. Assessment. Admiral Sophia Alvarez answered. Unknown species. She changed the display. Civilian vessel. Another image appeared, surrounded by disputed territory. Foreign Minister Elias Chen sighed. If we intervene, we'll cross borders recognized by nearly 40 interstellar governments. General Hale nodded. I know. Finance representatives immediately objected. The operation could trigger sanctions. Another added, humanity still lacks formal recognition within several galactic alliances. A third leaned forward. We don't even know these people. Silence returned. Then Dr. Elena Carter quietly stood. She wasn't military. She wore a white medical coat beneath a weathered jacket, having come directly from orbital hospitals. She looked around the room. My grandfather survived Earth's last continental war. No one interrupted. He told me that the worst memory wasn't the bombs. She swallowed. It wasn't hunger. It was hearing rescue aircraft overhead and realizing they were flying somewhere else. Every eye settled on her. He said hope can die before people do. Her voice grew firmer. We've all just listened to an entire ship begging strangers not to let them die alone. Another silence. General Hale finally asked one question. If they were human, he looked around the room. What would we do? No one answered. Because everyone already knew. 3 minutes later, the vote concluded. Unanimous. The order spread across Earth faster than sunrise. Fleet yards awakened. Massive construction docks opened armored blast doors that had remained sealed for years. Welding torches illuminated shipyards stretching hundreds of kilometers above the planet. Cargo elevators thundered into motion while automated cranes loaded relief containers by the thousands. This wasn't an invasion, it wasn't retaliation, it wasn't conquest, it was rescue. Human rescue fleets never traveled empty. Medical frigates stocked entire hospitals, industrial carriers loaded atmospheric processors. Agricultural transports carried enough food to sustain entire worlds. Armored escort cruisers surrounded them like moving fortresses. Not because humanity expected gratitude, because someone might try to stop them. Across Earth, families watched gigantic vessels rise from oceans, deserts, orbital elevators, and mountain hangars. Children waved. Veterans stood silently. Mechanics tightened the final bolts with grease-covered hands. Flight crews embraced loved ones without dramatic speeches. Everyone understood the assignment. Bring them home. General Marcus Hale walked through the flagship, UNS Resolute. Unlike sleek alien warships built for elegance, human vessels resembled enormous industrial fortresses. Heavy armor plates overlapped like medieval shields. Massive engines dominated the stern. Every corridor echoed with the sound of boots, machinery, and disciplined urgency. Nothing decorative. Everything built to survive. He stopped inside the medical hangar. Thousands of surgical beds stood ready. Doctors checked equipment one final time. Nurses labeled emergency blood supplies. Portable shelters filled entire cargo decks. Dr. Lena Carter adjusted her gloves. We're prepared. Marcus nodded. I hope they're still alive. She looked toward the stars through the armored viewport. They've held on this long. They're waiting for someone. Bridge alarms sounded. Fleet ready for departure. Marcus entered the command deck. Hundreds of ships appeared across tactical displays. Rescue carriers, hospital ships, escort destroyers, heavy battleships, supply vessels. Every one of them answering a voice that had never spoken to humanity before. The countdown reached 0. Outside, engines brighter than dawn ignited across the fleet. Earth slowly disappeared behind walls of blue-white light as thousands of propulsion arrays synchronized into perfect formation. Marcus rested one hand on the command rail. His voice remained quiet. Open a transmission. Communications complied. He knew the alien vessel would never receive it. Distance made that impossible. Still, he spoke anyway. If anyone out there is still listening, he paused. Hold on. The bridge fell completely silent. We are coming. Across the darkness, space itself began to bend. Hundreds of human warships aligned into perfect formation. Slipspace gates erupted open like artificial suns. One after another, the colossal fleet vanished into the unknown. The stars grew quiet once more. But this time, humanity was moving toward the silence. The emergency clock on the bridge no longer displayed hours. It displayed minutes. Every officer aboard the Sovereign Spear watched the crimson numbers crawl downward while the ship drifted through the black emptiness of disputed space. Oxygen reserves had fallen below survival thresholds, forcing every compartment except the medical deck and bridge into complete shutdown. Frost spread across the inner walls where heating systems had failed, and every breath carried a faint white mist. Captain Kalen had not left the bridge in nearly 18 hours. His uniform had become stained with hydraulic fluid after helping engineers manually seal ruptured ventilation ducts. His hands shook from exhaustion, yet he continued reading status reports that no longer offered solutions. Chief Engineer Soreth slowly approached. "We've lost Deck 7. Kalen nodded. "I know." Atmosphere vented. "I know." Soreth looked away before speaking again. "The final oxygen processors are degrading faster than expected." "How long?" The engineer hesitated. 5 hours. No one spoke after that. 5 hours wasn't enough time for rescue. 5 hours was barely enough time to prepare people for death. Far below the bridge, Dr. Seraphis walked through corridors lined with families lying beneath thermal blankets. The infirmary had overflowed days earlier. Children slept beside elderly civilians while volunteers quietly distributed the final packets of nutrient gel. There wasn't enough for everyone. There hadn't been enough for days. Doctor. Saris knelt beside Terran, the young boy Captain Kalen had spoken with before. His breathing had become shallow. His lips had turned pale. She adjusted the tiny oxygen mask over his face. His eyes opened slowly. "Doctor, I'm here. Did anyone answer us?" The question landed like a blade. She forced herself to smile. "They're still listening." Terran studied her face. "My mother always said, grown-ups lie with their eyes." Dr. Saris couldn't answer. Instead, she gently held his small hand until he drifted back into an exhausted sleep. Communications Officer Lyra continued transmitting. Every 12 seconds. Again. The same distress call echoed across hundreds of light years. "This is civilian vessel Sovereign Spear. Life support critical. Requesting humanitarian assistance. Children aboard. Please." Each message disappeared into silence. No acknowledgments, no military challenge, no automated response, nothing. Lyra removed her headset. "I don't think anyone is left." Captain Kalen looked toward the stars. "I refuse to believe an entire galaxy forgot compassion. Nearly 12 light years away, space distorted, not violently, methodically. Thousands of blue-white fractures spread across the darkness like cracks forming inside frozen glass. Sensors throughout the Sovereign Spear suddenly awakened. Dead consoles flashed back to life. Emergency alarms screamed across every surviving compartment. Navigation Officer Herrick stared at his display. "No!" His hands froze above the controls. "No!" Captain Kalen stepped beside him. "What is it?" Herrick's voice cracked. "Mass energy emergence." Another officer looked up. Computer processing struggled. Numbers climbed. 50, 100, 300, 600. The bridge became silent. The computer finally stabilized. Confirmed. 1,142 vessels emerging from slipspace. No one moved. The sensor display was impossible, a formation that large belonged only to empires preparing planetary invasion. Soreth whispered, "We're dead." The darkness ahead erupted into brilliant light. One by one, then hundreds at once, massive vessels tore through slipspace. Unlike every elegant galactic warship Kalen had ever commanded against, these ships looked brutally practical. They possessed thick armored hulls instead of graceful curves. Heavy weapon batteries sat recessed beneath overlapping armor plating. Gigantic engine assemblies glowed deep blue, their exhaust resembling controlled stars. There was no beauty, only purpose. The lead vessel alone dwarfed the Sovereign Spear. Its shadow swallowed the dying cruiser completely. Across its weathered hull stood unfamiliar symbols painted in white. UNES Resolute. Inside the human flagship, Fleet Commander Marcus Hale stood calmly behind the tactical display. Status. Target vessel confirmed. Life signs? The operations officer frowned. Extremely weak. Atmosphere failing. Medical estimates place complete life support collapse within 4 hours. Marcus didn't hesitate. Launch everything. Within seconds, hundreds of rescue craft detached from the fleet. Medical shuttles, engineering vessels, atmospheric processors, supply transports, no weapons. No attack formation, only rescue. Dr. Elena Carter watched hundreds of volunteers boarding the medical craft. Many had remained awake since leaving Earth. No one complained. No one asked whether the missions was dangerous. Every person understood why they were here. Aboard the Sovereign Spear, panic spread faster than hope. "They're deploying ships, battle formation, defensive stations." Captain Kalen raised his voice. "Stand down." Every officer looked toward him. "If they intended to destroy us," he pointed toward the tactical display, They could have done so before we even detected them. Silence followed. Then another transmission arrived. Unlike every previous automated military broadcast, this one began with a human face. A middle-aged man wearing a dark naval uniform appeared on every surviving screen aboard the alien vessel. Gray hair, scarred features, steady eyes. His voice carried unusual calm. "This is Fleet Commander Marcus Hale of the United Nations Expeditionary Fleet." He paused. "We have received your distress signal." Every person aboard the Sovereign Spear stopped breathing. Marcus continued. "You are no longer alone." Another pause. "Our medical teams are approaching. We request permission to board." Captain Kalen couldn't speak. Communications Officer Lyra whispered. "They're asking permission." Even now, with overwhelming military superiority, they asked. Kalen slowly activated his transmitter. His exhausted voice trembled. "This is Captain Kalen. Permission granted." The first human shuttle docked 9 minutes later. Airlocks cycled open with heavy metallic echoes. Every alien security officer instinctively raised their weapons. Then they froze. The humans weren't charging. They weren't carrying rifles. The first people through the hatch wore white medical armor marked with red crosses. Some pushed floating surgical equipment. Others carried oxygen tanks nearly as large as themselves. "Doctor." Elena Carter stepped forward first. She removed her helmet, slowly, carefully, showing both empty hands. "I am Dr. Elena Carter." The translation software rendered her words. "We're here to help." No one answered. The silence became almost painful. Finally, a tiny figure emerged from several frightened civilians. Taran, still wearing his oversized oxygen mask. He stared upward at the towering human doctor. "You came." Elena's eyes softened immediately. "We said we would." She knelt until they stood eye to eye. "You've been very brave." The little boy quietly wrapped both arms around her neck. No one aboard either ship expected that. Several alien officers looked away. One quietly wiped tears from his face. Within minutes, the Sovereign Spear transformed. Human engineers flooded damaged compartments. Heavy boots thundered across frozen corridors. Portable reactors roared to life. Fresh atmosphere surged through dead ventilation systems. Engineers welded ruptured hull sections, while others manually carried replacement life support units weighing hundreds of kilograms. Sweat soaked their uniforms despite the freezing temperatures. No one slowed down. Chief Engineer Sorath watched 6 humans lifting machinery his own crew normally required mechanical loaders to move. One engineer grinned. Gravity's heavier back home. Then he returned to work without another word. The medical decks became scenes Kalen would remember forever. Human doctors worked beside exhausted alien physicians without caring about language barriers. Translation software barely kept pace. More plasma, heart rate improving, prepare oxygen, nutrient infusion ready. Nurses who had not slept in 30 hours continued moving from bed to bed. One human medic quietly removed his own insulated jacket and wrapped it around an elderly alien woman who had begun shivering uncontrollably. Another spent nearly an hour reading translated children's stories because frightened young patients refused to sleep alone. No cameras documented these moments. No speeches celebrated them. They happened because someone needed help. Captain Kalen finally met Marcus Hale face-to-face inside the damaged bridge. The human commander appeared exactly as expected. Broad shoulders, scarred hands, eyes carrying decades of difficult decisions. Yet there was nothing threatening about him. Marcus simply extended one hand. Kalen hesitated before copying the unfamiliar gesture. The human smiled faintly. "I'm glad we reached you." Kalen stared at him. "You crossed disputed space. Yes. You risked war. Yes. You brought over 1,000 ships for strangers." Marcus looked through the shattered bridge window toward the exhausted civilians. "They stopped being strangers when we heard them asking for help." Kalen lowered his head. "I don't understand your people," Marcus answered quietly. "You don't have to." 3 days passed. For the first time in weeks, the Sovereign Spear had light, warm meals, clean air. Children laughed again inside repaired corridors. Alien crew members found themselves drinking coffee with human mechanics while comparing stories of impossible repairs. Dr. Saris finally slept, nearly 18 uninterrupted hours. When she awoke, she discovered human nurses had continued treating every patient without disturbing her. No one had asked whose responsibility it was. They simply did the work. Hope returned carefully. Like sunlight after endless winter, the peace ended with a single alarm. Every light aboard both fleets shifted crimson. Human tactical officers snapped toward their stations. Bridge speakers thundered. Unknown fleet emerging. Multiple slipspace ruptures. Confirmed military signatures. Captain Kalen's blood ran cold. He knew those energy patterns. The Dominion. The same military coalition that had forced civilian traffic into this sector before abandoning them. One enemy battleship emerged. Then 20. Then 80. Finally, 2 enormous dreadnoughts appeared behind the formation. Marcus studied the tactical display. Numbers: 191 hostile vessels. The Dominion command channel opened immediately. An armored alien admiral appeared. His expression carried complete confidence. "You have entered restricted territory." He looked briefly toward the repaired sovereign spear. "Return our property." Marcus's face remained unreadable. "They're civilians. They are evidence. They will be surrendered." The bridge fell silent. Marcus slowly stood. He pressed one command onto his console. Across space, more than 1,000 human ships changed formation simultaneously. Battleships accelerated first. Cruisers followed. Carrier groups shifted. Without firing a single weapon, the entire human fleet placed itself between the Dominion Armada and the helpless alien survivors. Every armored hull faced outward. Every rescue vessel disappeared safely behind an unbreakable wall of steel. Warning klaxons echoed through every deck. Weapons powered online. Shields reached maximum output. Captain Kalen looked through the viewport in stunned silence. The humans had not formed around themselves. They had formed around him. Commander Marcus Hale stared at the enemy admiral with absolute calm. Then he spoke 5 words that silenced both fleets. "They're under Earth's protection," and across the black sea of stars. Not a single human ship moved an inch. The tactical display painted the darkness crimson. 191 Dominion warships held formation beyond the silent line of human battleships. Thousands of weapon signatures locked onto the United Nations Expeditionary Fleet, while missile tubes opened like rows of steel fangs. On every bridge throughout the human armada, warning tones echoed with cold precision. Yet no captain gave an order to fire. Fleet Commander Marcus Hale stood motionless aboard the UNS Resolute. His hands rested behind his back. His breathing remained slow. Every officer around him knew exactly what the next command could mean. If even one weapon discharged, the rescue fleet would become the center of the largest battle this region of space had witnessed in centuries. The Dominion transmission returned. Admiral Reyes appeared on the main display, wearing polished black armor decorated with medals earned through conquest. Behind him stretched the bridge of his dreadnought, alive with officers preparing firing solutions. "You have one final opportunity, Commander," Marcus answered without raising his voice. "I'm listening. The vessel you are protecting belongs to the Dominion Tribunal. It carries classified evidence. It will be surrendered immediately." Marcus looked through the armored viewport toward the damaged sovereign spear. Repair drones still crawled across its scarred hull. Medical shuttles continued moving between ships despite the threat surrounding them. He finally spoke. "It carries civilians." Varix narrowed his eyes. "They are politically inconvenient civilians. They are still civilians." The Dominion Admiral leaned closer. "Do you intend to begin a war over strangers?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "No." Silence filled both bridges. Then he continued. "I intend to prevent one." The Dominion officers exchanged confused glances. Marcus's expression never changed. "Humanity does not abandon people who ask for help. You may disagree, but you will not reach them." Captain Kalen listened from the bridge of the Sovereign Spear. For most of his military career, he had believed strength meant overwhelming firepower. Every academy in the Alliance had taught the same lesson. Larger fleets dictated peace. Stronger governments decided morality. Now he watched something entirely different. The humans possessed enough weapons to devastate entire systems, yet every gun remained silent. Every shield faced outward. Every battleship protected people who shared neither their language nor their history. Chief Engineer Soreth quietly asked, "Would our own government have done this for us?" No one answered, because everyone already knew. Across the human fleet, no one waited idly. Engineers continued reinforcing the alien ship's damaged hull. Medical personnel refused to leave operating rooms. Supply crews unloaded food, medicine, portable reactors, blankets, and atmospheric processors. Heavy boots echoed across steel corridors as technicians hauled equipment weighing hundreds of kilograms. One exhausted nurse collapsed briefly against a bulkhead after treating patients for nearly 30 hours. Another medic handed her a bottle of water. "You need sleep." She shook her head. "They've waited long enough already." Then she returned to work. No medals would be awarded for those moments. No cameras recorded them. History would remember the fleet. Very few would remember the people carrying oxygen tanks through freezing hallways. Inside the pediatric ward, Taran sat beside Dr. Elena Carter. The boy had regained enough strength to walk again. He watched the stars through a small observation window. "Are we going to die?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I don't think so. You don't know." "No. Then why aren't you scared?" She smiled gently. "I am." Taran looked surprised. "You are? Every doctor is. So why did you come?" Elena rested one hand against the window. "Because fear doesn't decide where we go." The child remained quiet for several seconds. "My father used to say heroes never get afraid." Elena shook her head. "Your father was wrong. The brave ones are simply the people who keep walking." Hours passed. Neither fleet moved. Dominion captains grew increasingly uneasy. Human tactical doctrine made no sense. There were no aggressive maneuvers. No attempts to gain firing advantage, no psychological games. Just an enormous wall of armored ships refusing to yield a single kilometer. Finally, one Dominion commander broke formation. His cruiser slowly advanced toward the Sovereign Spear. Instantly, more than 60 human battleships shifted together. Not aggressively, not hurriedly. They simply filled the space between the cruiser and the refugee vessel. The Dominion ship stopped. No warning shots, no threats, just steel, layer upon layer of steel. The message required no translation. You will have to go through us. Admiral Varric stared silently at the tactical display. His intelligence officers approached. Sir, he ignored them. Another officer spoke carefully. Our probability models have completed. And, if engagement begins, he swallowed. Human losses will be severe. Varric nodded. The officer hesitated. Complete fleet destruction is likely. Another analyst quietly added, They know that. Varric frowned. They're still standing there. The analyst looked toward the wall of human ships. I don't think they're protecting themselves. For the first time in decades, the Dominion admiral understood. Those ships had already accepted the possibility of dying. Not for territory, not for resources, not for revenge. For strangers. That realization frightened him more than any weapon. 6 minutes later, Dominion engines ignited, one by one. The warships turned away. No victory speeches followed. No celebrations echoed across the human fleet. Marcus simply watched until the final enemy vessel vanished into slip space. Only then did he quietly say, Stand down. Thousands of weapons powered off together. Across every deck, people finally breathed again. Journey to the alien homeworld lasted 11 days. Human engineers completely restored the Sovereign Spear. Medical teams remained aboard until every patient recovered. When the rescued vessel finally entered orbit above its capital world, billions gathered beneath the skies. Families filled city streets. Hospitals emptied, factories stopped, schools closed. Every screen across the planet displayed the returning convoy. As the Sovereign Spear descended through golden clouds, the first cheers erupted. Then came tears. Parents found children they had already buried in memory. Husbands embraced wives they believed lost forever. Captain Kalen stepped onto the landing platform carrying Terran in his arms. The boy saw his mother waiting beyond the crowd. He ran. Neither spoke. They simply held each other while the entire city watched. Even hardened human Marines quietly turned away to hide their own tears. 3 days later, the Galactic Assembly convened an emergency session. Representatives expected military accusations, economic demands, political retaliation. Instead, Commander Marcus Hale appeared before every government in known space. He wore no ceremonial uniform, no medals, only the same weathered naval jacket he had worn during the rescue. He spoke for less than 2 minutes. When your distress signal reached Earth, he paused. It did not ask what species you were. It did not ask which alliance you served. It simply asked whether anyone was still listening. Marcus looked directly into the cameras. Humanity answered. If another voice someday calls into the darkness, he glanced briefly toward the rescued civilians seated behind him. We hope someone answers again. No applause followed, only silence. Not because the delegates disagreed, because none of them had remembered how simple compassion could be. Months later, new emergency beacons were installed across hundreds of civilizations. Joint rescue treaties replaced old political barriers. Human hospitals appeared on worlds that had once feared Deathworlders. The phrase Earth Fleet no longer inspired thoughts of conquest. It meant rescue, it meant shelter, it meant hope. Captain Kalen eventually visited Earth. Outside humanity's oldest rescue coordination center, carved into black granite, he found a single sentence beneath thousands of names belonging to people who had died saving lives. He stood there for a long time before quietly reading it aloud. Hold on. His voice almost broke. We are coming. For a galaxy that had once believed humanity's greatest weapon was its fleet, the truth had become impossible to ignore. Earth's greatest weapon had never been its battleships. It had always been the people willing to stand behind them.